Well, let's find out more about these new measures that the Chancellor is going to unveil to tackle the cost of living crisis, spending billions to help households across the country deal with soaring costs. And after months of pressure from the opposition parties, Rishi Sunak is expected to announce this windfall tax on energy companies and use that money to help bring down people's bills. Well, let's take a look at how those energy costs have grown. The price cap, which sets a limit on how much energy companies can charge the average customer for gas and electricity, last winter was £1,277. Following a spike in wholesale oil and gas costs, this rose to £1,971 in April, an increase of 54%. Those on the prepayment meters, though, pay even more. And in October, bills are expected to rise again by over £800, with the price cap rising to around £2,800. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, is here. All massive sums, Ed, but just put them in some kind of context for us. How bad is it historically? How high is it?
I'll show you that first of all, because, I mean, you're talking about the last few years, but actually, if you go back even further, and let me just take those energy bills in particular, because look at this, going back even further, so we're looking back to 2009 and just looking at those average levels of bills that we've seen going back all that period, we'll have a look at this. You know, it's never been up at the level we're at the moment. So that's kind of where we are right now, that line there. But just look at where it's heading in the next few months. So that's on the basis of, if Ofgem is right, that we're going up to £2,800 for the average household. And bear in mind, what I'm showing you here is average households. You know, your experience may be very different indeed. That shows you just the overall level. But when you kind of look at the scale of this, as a percentage of people's average spending. So you're looking at the percentage of your average spending which goes on these energy bills. This goes all the way back here to 1957. So we're going back basically as far as we possibly can. And for all of that period, the proportion of average spending that's gone on energy bills has been within this kind of this light blue area. But just look at what happens now. So here's where we are at the moment, highest since the mid-1980s. So very high in recent history, but not necessarily kind of historic highs. But just look at what happens if it does indeed go up to 2,800, which is what everyone basically expects now. It is up there. Now, that is way above, you know, where we've ever seen this before. And that's basically, you know, the epicenter of what the government is so concerned about. They have already, so Rishi Sunak has already done that set of measures, council tax, a temporary decrease in bills. That brings it down temporarily, at least, to there, still historically high. And so the expectation is, and that, you know, none of this is new, really, but we're expecting the government to give a bit more money, which basically pushes that down a little bit. So you may be within the kind of no longer unprecedented area, but you're still talking about bills very, very high. Kind of by my reckoning, it's kind of maybe around there, so up around the top of that box rather than just above it. But, I mean, you were mentioning, Jane, a second ago, just what's happening with those energy companies and how much they're earning at the moment. And if you just look, take a bit of context, look back last year. So this is Shell here. That's BP. That's this time last year. So Q1 of 2021. You're talking about kind of $3 billion, $2 billion. This is kind of adjusted profits. Just look at what happens to those bars this year. I mean, it's an extraordinary increase, isn't it? I mean, it goes up to... It's absolutely massive. And, you know, this is the question as to, you know, how much of that is excess profits? And the big question is going to be, what's the Chancellor going to do about it? How much is it going to take off? But we were hearing from Ian King a moment ago, you know, you can't really make enough off even a kind of relatively big windfall tax to generate enough money to make those previous charts look palatable at all. So you're still having to look back to kind of existing taxation. But even so, that's going to be the contrast, looking at what the oil giants are earning right now and then working out how you take that money and bring it back to customers or indeed to households. And the final thing to say, Jane, I'm going to come and sit down. Final thing to say is, you know, how much of this is temporary? And that's really the big question that we don't really know about from... well, no one really knows that. But you get the impression that lots of the measures that the government is introducing are kind of one-off. So it's just to help people get through the next year, because that's, frankly, the cheapest way of dealing with
furlough,
this.
like
reduction
in VAT.
Exactly. There's a desperation not to kind of make these permanent things. But here's the thing, you know, a lot of these increases in energy bills could last a lot longer than the next year. So if you're talking about a permanent adjustment in how much people are paying, which we may be seeing because, you know, we no longer have cheap Russian gas anymore, then this may not necessarily be enough, and it's only the latest in a whole series of measures we have to get from the government. But let's see. We'll see what they introduce and see how it's structured.
It's quite a gloomy thought, but so you're essentially saying that this big rise that we are expecting in the autumn could potentially not be the last, or it could be the sort of figure that we end up paying for quite a long time?
Well, no one really knows. If you look at futures curves, so, basically this is all measured on the basis of what these energy companies are paying, not just this month, but in the next 6 months and further ahead. You've got kind of futures markets where they can buy these energy costs, the wholesale energy. And if you look at them, it goes up very high. That's kind of where we are at the moment, and then starts to kind of come down a bit. But even by the end of that futures curve, so looking out the next year after that, you're still talking about levels that are kind of pretty much double what we're used to. That first chart I showed you, the level, we just don't seem to be in that world anymore. And if we're not, what we're going to hear about from the Chancellor, is that going to be enough? It doesn't look like it, but let's see.
See, indeed. Ed, thanks very much.